Can everybody see the presentation? And hear it?
Glenwood Springs has always had a special place, I think, in the heart of the community here on Orcas Island. I first came up here about 15 years ago, and I remember looking around and I thought, this is a place where if I had these kinds of resources and I had land like this, I'd do this exact same thing. I mean, the fact that Jim was able to pull together water and ponds and a former orchard and grow salmon that are this big on a stream that's this big is just amazing.
We weren't looking for a place to start a salmon hatchery, but it was shortly after we found this place that the question sort of just came out, just naturally, is wonder if we could get some salmon to grow here. And just sort of started off real small. We got some eggs from a state hatchery and built incubation box, and when they eyed out and hatched, we put a net pen in the large pond down here and moved the little fry into the pond and started feeding them, and not having any idea if this was going to work or not. We released the smolts when they grew, and that fall we started getting returns of jack salmon. Now we're releasing about 750,000 Chinook salmon each year and getting returns of, up to 25 to 35 pound salmon coming back here. That's how it got started, and we had no idea where this was going to go, but it just grew from there. But it definitely changed my life.
Partnerships and community building is kind of a central theme for the Glenwood Springs Hatchery. This is really a hub of activity, and you can see at an event like today where we have over 100 people come together to celebrate this place. It has tremendous community support, people who just approve of this and want to support this kind of thing.
I don't know if many people know the history of this property, but this was one of our village sites. This is where my ancestors are buried, right down there by the water still today. Something with this property is really, really touching me in my heart. This is a place that's really showing that our ancestors are still here. They still are watching over us.
The thing I like to show off most is what you're seeing right now, these adult salmon coming back. This is the fruit of all the hard work we've done over the year to get the fish back. The kids really enjoying seeing this aspect of it. This is the next generation of folks that are going to be hopefully doing kind of the same thing I'm doing.
Like baby fish, like fish again.
This hatchery is different in that the fish here are raised in natural earthen ponds. We don't control for any predation. Those fish are learning how to forage for the aquatic insects in the pond, just like a wild salmon would be in a river. So I think these fish that leave Glenwood Springs have a more natural instinct for what they're going to deal with when they hit the marine environment. This little hatchery, which started Long Live the Kings 30-some years ago, is a perfect example of where you can start a salmon run in a stream where one did not exist before. That was accomplished. That was a great feat back then, but now we're providing a recreational and commercial fishery to folks from the San Juans all the way up to Alaska.
It is really a truly magical place with a magical fish that we all worship and hope that we have here forever.
Well, that was quite a presentation there. Do you want to take it away, Mike?
Sure. I mean, as the video shows, that's what we've accomplished over the last close to 40 years from Jim Youngren's idea. And we're continuing to do the same today. Currently, we have the first part of our adult Chinook coming back to the hatchery. So we've had 15 fish up the fish ladder so far into our holding pond. And there's lots more out in the bay waiting to come in.
So they come back to the same hatchery?
Yep. So these fish are, when they're reared as juveniles, they imprint on a particular water chemistry of a certain stream. And that's, genetically encoded in them. And when they come back as adults, they can literally smell their way back to their natal stream.
Now, through the video, they showed the little tiny newly hatched salmon. Was that correct? That all the eggs were all the orange things, correct?
Correct. You saw the eggs being fertilized and put into incubators. And then when they hatch out of that egg, you saw in the video where they were little teeny salmon with big red belly. That is yolk. That's essentially their food. They're not eating anything solid at that point. They're still in the incubators, but they're absorbing that yolk over the course of about a month. And once that is gone, that's when we'll move those fry, as we call them then, out to our earthen ponds. And then we start feeding them solid food at that point. And then those fish are raised on site for about 3.5 months before they are released as smolts in the spring. And the reason they're called smolts at that point is that they go through a process called smoltification, where their physiology changes internally so they can handle going from fresh to salt water.
Anybody have any questions for Mike?
I have a question.
After you. Mike, how many smolt do you release each year or this year?
Well, the goal, the goal moving forward is to take 1 million eggs and release 800,000 plus. We get about 10% natural mortality in the incubation system. So that's the goal. And it all depends on the amount of adults we get back. So the last couple of years have been, we've only been getting a couple hundred adults back. And that's all due to the ocean conditions and what they're having to deal with. So sometimes, we're down below that 800,000 mark, but that's the goal each spring.
What's the swim distance involved?
How far do these fish travel? So our fish, when we release fish from the hatchery, they're marked, which means the adipose fin is removed when they're about 3 inches long. And the adipose fin is a little fin on the dorsal side or top side of the fish, just in front of its tail. And adipose simply means fat. It's just a fatty storage tip. So when that is removed, it doesn't regenerate. And that's how you can tell visually the difference between a wild fish and a hatchery fish when they come back or when you catch one. Additionally, so we mark everything that goes out, and then we put in 100,000 coated wire tags into those that population. The coated wire tag is a little magnetized piece of stainless steel wire that is mechanically injected into the snout at the same time the fish is having its adipose fin removed. And that tag can be detected with a handheld metal detector type thing. So you wouldn't see that tag in a fish if you caught it as an adult. But when those fish come back, there's biologists out in the field at different marinas and the commercial plants that take in all the commercially caught fish, and they detect those tags. And when a tag is detected, biological data is taken from that fish in the form of, is it a male, a female, the length of it, and so on. And then the snout is removed with that tag in it. And the information is sent along with that snout to a lab in Olympia that the State Fish and Wildlife runs. And they can remove that tag and tell which hatchery it came from. Each tag has a laser etched numerical code on it. So from that coded wire tag data, that's how we can determine where these fish go. And the majority of our fish, once they leave the San Juans, they go clear up into Southeast Alaska and forage for food up there for 3 or 4 years before coming home.
Mike, do you ever get other or wild salmon getting confused on their way back and come up your hatchery unexpectedly?
We have not detected any wild Chinook returning back here. One year I had a male chum salmon show up with all the Chinook, and he would come up the ladder. I kept throwing him back out into the saltwater bay. He just kept coming and coming. So finally I kept him in hopes of maybe a female chum showing up, but no luck. So, but that's the only oddball we've had here at the hatchery.
I'll bring the chum down to Buck Bay.
Yeah, there you go.
Hi, David. You it looks like you were talking, but you weren't coming through on the audio at all.
Hey, Mike, what about Jim's idea of holding fry over or smoke or whatever for an extra year? What became of that?
So yeah, Jim, at the request of Jim, we started holding fish back for 2 years. This has never been done anywhere, so nobody knows what the results of it are. We have released one of those 2-year-old populations last year. We still have 2 separate populations on site in the earthen ponds. So this fall will give us the opportunity to start looking at how those fish are returning. Are they coming back early? Are they coming back late? So this will be the first year. They were uniquely marked when they went out, so they'll be easy to identify when they come back. So again, David, this fall will be kind of the first year of us getting some information back on that project.
I have a question. Do you feel hopeful for the time that you've been there? Do you feel like do you see results and it makes you feel like the population of fish has a chance?
Yeah, we've had our ups and downs here I've been here 20 years, so I've seen a lot of things come and go. But yeah, I think, we made some changes back in 2007, going to releasing only what are called zero-age fish. Those are fish that are spawned in the fall and they get released, in the early spring. We've done some other ideas, holding fish back for a year, that kind of stuff. But what really seems to work is focusing on this zero-age population, which seems to be, since we initiated that back in 2007, we've really seen good results from it. And I encourage anybody that is interested, that knows where the property is down by the fish ladder, that stop by and have a look at the fish that are out in the bay. Generally, we need a nice sunny day in the afternoon when the tide's high, but it's a neat thing to come see these fish milling around in the bay, and you might get lucky to see them coming up the ladder as well.
What's the best time of day or tide to come down and look?
Generally in the afternoon, Sandy, when the tide is high and the sun is kind of cleared over the top of the trees, so you get a good view into the hatchery bay there.
Now you're doing some stuff with the was it cochineal salmon in Cascade Lake?
Yeah, so years and years ago, Fish and Wildlife used to stock Cascade Lake with kokanee. Due to budgetary constraints, they stopped doing that. And the fishery really went downhill, according to a lot of the local fishermen that target those fish up there. So we, Long Live the Kings, partnered with the state, and we started getting eggs from the Whatcom Lake kokanee hatchery and rearing them on site at the park, and then releasing them ourselves when they got to a certain size. And so that's really helped the population come back, and the fishing opportunities are a lot better these days. So yeah, we've been doing that for about the last 15 years.
And kokanee are salmon that can live in fresh water?
Yeah, so kokanee are a landlocked version of sockeye salmon. And essentially the lakes are their oceans, and they do the same thing in the fall. They'll come up the creeks that feed those lakes and spawn just like a sockeye would coming out of the saltwater, spawning in a freshwater stream.
Which one is tastier?
I think they're both good fish to eat. Kokanee aren't quite as big, but still a tasty fish.
So how many volunteers do you have to help you, assist you with all of this projects?
In the springtime, when we do all the marking and tagging, we actually get a budget from State Fish and Wildlife to hire locals to help us. But in the fall, when it's time to spawn salmon, it's just me here at the hatchery. So I rely heavily on the community at large to come out and give me a hand. So we'll have, 20 to 30 people at a spawning in the fall to help out with that. So it's a great way for the public to get involved, and a big help to me.
How can people get involved?
They can contact me. I don't know if Jim maybe can pass along my contact information to whoever's interested, but they can just call me and I can let you, I can keep you updated on when we're going to do spawns. We generally do 4 or 5 of them throughout the fall, and people can come out and they can go as far as getting in a pair of Long Live the Kings waders and getting in the pond and wrestling the fish, or they can just stand by and watch. So all kinds of activities for people to get involved in.
Well, perhaps,
Yeah, I'm sorry. That's thank you for that. I know I would be interested in doing that. I'm sure many of our members here at the Orca Senior Center would probably find that interesting also.
Yeah, I
Yeah, and
suspect we'll start one up here in the next couple of weeks once we start getting more salmon back.
well, then what would be really good is maybe when you're doing this, the spawning projects, you can drop me an email and I can blast it out to our members and try and get some more people out there to help you.
That sounds good.
So what got you involved with this project?
Well, 20 plus years ago, my wife and I were living in Bend, Oregon, and I was working as a fisheries biologist for the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. And we were just looking to make a change, and we liked the Puget Sound area. And there was a listserv at the time that posted all kinds of natural resource jobs throughout the Pacific Northwest. And I noticed this one here with Long Live the Kings. I wasn't really interested in hatchery work, but after interviewing for the job here and seeing what a unique hatchery this was, and also the fact that we conduct research projects here as well, that was my background before coming here. It was, really interesting to me, and fortunately here I am 20 years later.
So is somebody an Elvis fan?
No, the Long Live the Kings is the slang term for Chinook salmon because they're the largest of the 5 salmon species here. And there's still debate on where the name came from. Some say Jim Youngren concocted it on a napkin at a bar years and years ago, but I really don't know the origin. But I get that question a lot.
Yeah, let's just assume someone is an Elvis fan.
Yeah.
So what prompted Jim to do this?
You know, when Jim bought the property in 1977, he was an avid salmon fisherman and was involved with salmon restoration and conservation efforts in the Seattle area. But after purchasing this property, there's 300 acres here, and there's 3 artesian springs that boil up on the property and provide all this fresh water. So the reason there was no fish in this stream to begin with is it was pretty high gradient, small stream, and it tumbled off a waterfall into the saltwater bay. So there's no access for fish. But when Jim bought the property, he was interested in trying to do something to benefit salmon. And a friend of his at the time was an engineer, and they came up with the idea of seeing if they could get some salmon eggs from the State Fish and Wildlife, rear them on site in a basic little incubation box they built next to the stream. And they released fish in the late 70s, and they kept doing it annually because, you know, these fish are going to spend 3 to 4 years out in the ocean before they come home. And lo and behold, a couple of years later, they started seeing adult salmon jumping in the bay, trying to get at that creek, which was still a waterfall at the time. So Jim got the bright idea of getting one of his friends that was a commercial salmon fisherman, and they came in the bay with a purse seine boat and seined all the adults up, brought them on shore, took the eggs out of the females, the milt or sperm out of the males, fertilized them, put them back in their box. And they realized they had another year to get a bunch of infrastructure in place to start accepting these salmon back. So that's when the fish ladder was built, the holding pond was built, the hatchery building, and so on. And so it's just continued since then. And a couple of years after putting a lot of his own time, effort, and money into it, Jim decided to create the nonprofit Long Live the Kings in 1985 to start, you know, funding this and growing the operation to today. Long Live the Kings is one of the largest organizations that deal with salmon on a nonprofit scale, that's dealing with salmon in conjunction with managing them with tribes and State Fish and Wildlife. So it's come quite full circle from what it started with.
So does Long Live the Kings have more than just this orca site in the Puget Sound area?
Yeah, we have another facility similar to this down on Hood Canal on a creek called Lillawop Creek. But down there, what they've been doing is they are capturing wild, endangered summer chum, steelhead that were in that creek historically, but their numbers had dropped way down. And so they were collecting the adults when they came back to spawn, rearing those eggs in the hatchery, because you get a much better successful rate in the hatchery versus out in the wild. And they were replanting those fish back into the creek, building those populations back up to the point where some of the projects they're working on, they built those fish populations back up to where they just backed off and let the fish start doing things naturally again on their own. So we've got that facility there, and we have an office in downtown Seattle with about 12 full-time employees working on salmon conservation, restoration, policy issues statewide.
Wow.
Oh, I didn't realize that there was a staff in Seattle working too.
Yeah, so it's come quite a ways from when they had the little box sitting next to the stream to what it is today.
Mike, can I make a quick pitch on the effort to try to acquire water rights from Rosario to put it back in Cascade Creek where it came from?
Sure.
That was pretty much it.
Okay, yeah. No, I know that is an ongoing effort, and I think that would be one that would be very successful if we could get Rosario to kick back some of that water for the coho and chum that are seen in Cascade Creek.
Surfboards got $500,000 set aside for it, and I believe there's negotiations going on.
Well, good. Hopefully we can secure that.
Yeah. How about other people? Is everybody else aware of what's going on?
No, I'm not aware of it. Maybe you want to talk about it, Mike or Sandy?
I think Sandy would be best. He's probably most up to date on that than I am.
Okay. Well, way back in the old days, 1800s, 1885, 1884, the state granted water rights from Cascade Creek and many other places, but without scientific data, they gave away more water rights than there was actual water. So we have a bit of a dilemma. Mountain Lake and Cascade Creek, there's just a limited supply of water. And in some, so they have the water rights, and it's a little confusing, but the first water right in time gets his water first before anybody else gets a drop. So Rosario is allowed to divert water out of Cascade Creek over to Cascade Lake, where it never comes back to the creek, Cascade Creek, where the salmon are being reared. So the effort going on now is to buy those water rights from Rosario and leave the water in Cascade Creek to take its natural course down to Buck Bay. The last reach of Buck Bay, I think it's around 600 feet, has natural spawning salmon. We've had coho, chum, and a few king juvenile, Mike, they might have got lost. So that's it. You know, if anybody has any influence anywhere, just, you know, I've sent letters off to our state representatives, senators, Fish and Wildlife, everybody I could think of. I'm open to any suggestions if anybody has ideas.
Sam, did you say that there is it Sandy or Sand? Your thing says Sandy. Sandy. Did you say there's negotiations with Rosario currently?
That's what I've heard, yes.
Okay.
I put all the information I have on a website. It included a video of shiner perch, surf smelt coming up the stream, and some older video of a chum run in Cascade Creek. So that site is CMOS Sandy, SANDY, .com.
CMOS Sandy.
Yeah.
Y.com.
Yeah.
I'm putting it in chat.
Okay. Yeah, it was CMOS SANDY. Yeah. So that has several videos on it. One of them's of my daughter, and I think you'll be surprised how honest she is as a fisherman. She caught a chum and it got away, and then she was honest about how big it was.
So one of the questions I have for you, Mike, how many types of species of salmon are there that are in this area?
We have 5 Pacific salmon species. So there's Chinook, Coho, chum, sockeye, and pink salmon. And we do have what's lumped into that is a steelhead. And a steelhead is just a rainbow trout that has decided to go to the sea. And it has the same life cycle as these other Pacific salmon species. The one main difference is that when Pacific salmon come back and spawn as adults, they all die. These steelhead can go out to sea, come back several years later, spawn, and go back out to sea and do this multiple times. So that's the big difference between steelhead and the other 5 Pacific salmon species, but they're lumped in all together.
So when the salmon go out and spawn, they die then afterwards?
Yeah, all Pacific salmon come back, spawn, die. The steelhead is an exception. And then we don't have these here naturally. They're in the fish farms that are all around the Pacific coast, but Atlantic salmon that are native to the East Coast, those are a fish that also can do multiple spawns back and forth to the ocean.
Hey, Mike, at the Long Live the King's site, when you've harvested all the eggs, etc., what do you do with the carcasses?
So in nature, when those fish die in the stream after spawning, they decompose and they deliver tremendous amounts of nutrients to the stream and the adjacent forest. And we do the same thing here. We'll take carcasses and string them up in the stream, put them in our earthen ponds to mimic that same natural nutrient reloading that takes place in the wild.
Yeah, we've had that in Cascade Creek, and does it stink?
It's not very pleasant.
There to make a pitch for the Coho Preserve. If anybody hasn't walked the trail over there, it's beautiful.
So what about the Coho Preserve?
Down by Buck Bay in Olga, there's a trail along Cascade Creek. It's quite beautiful.
It is very beautiful. I highly recommend it.
So that was a chunk of land that the land bank purchased not too long ago. And so they created that trail for the public to go have access to it. So yeah, it's a amazing little hike, loop hike.
What do you think will be the natural or sustainable population where you are now?
Here at the hatchery?
Yeah. I figure different years you get different returns, but at some point it should sort of stabilize, or is that what you?
Yeah, I mean, we see our returning adult populations go up and down just like they do in the wild, and that's all based on ocean conditions and how they're faring out there before returning home to spawn. So it's natural to see this go up and down, up and down, up and down throughout the years.
So what's the range?
You know, some years we've had as few as 200 or 300 back. One year we had up to close to 4,000 back. So we really only need about 200 pair to get the eggs that we can handle in the hatchery. So, but we'll use all the fish in one form or another.
Is there ever too much? Can you handle all of? You said it was up to 4,000.
Yeah, that was a very rare year, but yeah, I mean, on average we get back 800 to 1,000 adults, and they all just don't show up at once. They're, you know, we start seeing fish late to early September, and those fish will, that returning adult run will last all the way up until about Halloween.
So I saw in the video them holding some quite large salmon there. How big do they usually get when they return?
The average adult size returning here to the hatchery is about 20 pounds. We've seen some fish up to 30, 35 pounds, and a lot of them in the teens too. So a wide range. Sorry, my battery's running low here. I'm trying to get some power to it.
Well, we can always end earlier if you want. I mean, if it's okay with everybody else.
Well, thank you. Before you, in case your power does go out, thank you. That was very interesting, and that video was beautiful. So thank you very much.
Yes, the video was spectacular.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
20 years of work.
Yeah. Thanks again for having me. And again, I'll keep in touch with you, Jim, but tell folks to feel free to stop by the hatchery. And if they don't know where it's located, we can get them some directions.
Where are you located?
So we're on the Youngren's property. So if you're driving, say, from East Sound to Moran State Park, about 1.5 miles after you turn onto Olga Road from the gas station there, Country Corner, we're on the right and left-hand side of the road. You'll probably see the big pond on the left there. But yeah, it's the Youngren's private property. But if you turn right, just before you get to that pond you see on the left, it has just newly, they added a street name to it. And it's essentially Youngren's driveway on the west side of the county road. It says Creekside Drive. And if you pull in there and stay to your right and go down the hill, there's some parking and you can walk down to the fish ladder or stay up high and overlook the bay to see returning adults out there too.
Well, thank you so much, Mike. It was, this was very informative and really interesting, and learned a whole lot about salmon that I didn't know. So Thank you so much.
You bet. Well, good. Thanks again for having me.
Hey, Mike, what's your schedule like? When are you there most often?
I'm here generally 5 days a week, but now with salmon coming back, I'm, here 7 days a week checking on things. So, but I'm generally here throughout the day. If you wanted to stop by or something, just send me a text or give me a call.
All right, thanks. And again, thanks for the last 20 years.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you, Sandy. All right, take care.
Jim, can you stop recording, please?
Yeah, that's, I'm